Well, here we are again. This is the 22nd time in our history that we're at the IMF's doorstep. Pakistan's political parties are busy blaming each other, and few have an answer as to how to end our debt cycle. Except one. The left-leaning Awami Workers Party published a position paper in May 2019, which lays out a progressive approach to the Pakistani economy. What does that entail? First, the paper doesn't really discuss the loan. Instead, it takes a long view and highlights deep structural problems that Pakistan's economy faces. Some are well known, such as our low labor productivity, our low tax collection, our mismanaged agriculture sector. But the paper also highlights other problems not often discussed in the mainstream. Soch asked the paper's authors and academics to explain. 1. Pakistan is a rentier state.
So the rentier state is basically a concept in political science that is used for those states that derive a substantial share of national revenues from renting out natural or strategic resources to external clients. This is true, for instance, for oil-rich Gulf states, but also for national security states like Egypt. And in Pakistan's case, it's very clear that since the 50s onwards, the state has largely relied on external aid, both military and civilian, as well as foreign investment that is principally based around leveraging our strategic location. And since the Pakistani state has always managed to secure aid and revenue through these strategic rents, it has never really prioritized domestic production. And this is a problem that has now caught up with us.
2. There's insufficient economic planning in Pakistan.
One of the biggest problems with the free market ideology imposed by the IMF is that it takes away the capacity of the state to plan. So we were a growing industrial power from the 50s to the 70s. We had an interventionist state. I think one of the key insights that the left brings to the debate is that we need to go back to a more planned economy. Over 1 million workers entering the labor market every year, and with the looming climate catastrophe, I think these are two serious issues to be left to the market. We need a state that can actually develop an industrial plan to give opportunities to young people, and that would require taking on local and global finance, taking back control of our trade, and actually developing an industrial policy.
3. The military plays far too large a role.
I think what we need to understand is that, when we talk about Pakistan's policy making sort of matrix or the exercise of policy making, I mean, right now what we're facing, if you look at, the two parties that have ruled intermittently for a couple of decades, and then the third party, between the three of them, there's no discernible difference. They all say the same thing. They all want foreign investment. They all want to open up markets. They all want to privatize. But there's another actor in the story, which is the real elephant in the room, which is the military establishment, which has always shaped policy making, foreign policy, defense policy, and therefore economic policy. Because if you have such a huge chunk of your total expenditures which are dedicated to defense, and that includes non-combat expenditures, then you have very little leeway there. And on the other side, on the revenue side, on the tax side, if you say you want to tax and you want to increase the tax net, but there's this whole behemoth, which is the military's corporate empire, which is not taxed. They get all sorts of hidden subsidies in terms of not paying utilities. They get preference when it comes to the doling out of contracts. So there's if we can't talk about these things, then the idea of structural reform becomes essentially meaningless, or essentially just becomes the structural reform that the IMF wants, which is to pry open our economy, which all of the mainstream parties and indeed the military are already committed to.
4. The patriarchy's effect on the economy.
We absolutely cannot forget or undermine the disproportionate damage this does to women in countries like Pakistan. Because women are treated as domestic creatures, meant to be confined to the private spheres of their homes, they rely even more than their male counterparts do on public support to enter public spaces. That includes things like government scholarships to go to university, subsidized public transport to be able to attend that university, things like technical training programs aimed at women, land redistribution to increase female ownership, things like cash transfer policies directed at female heads of households so that they can save and invest in the education of their daughters. These policies have empowered women all over the world, but they require hefty public spending, which, as we all know, is anathema to institutions like the IMF.
To sum up, the left's case is that all of these structural problems are the result of ineffective capitalist policies and the narrow interests of Pakistan's military and political elites. These problems cannot be solved by neoliberal tools like IMF loans. Instead, to really fix Pakistan's economy, we need a return to organized planning, and we need to urgently redefine our relationship with female labor, the state, and the army.